There is an unmistakable pattern I see in people who tell me they don't really know who they are. They don't know their own preferences, their hopes, they don't know their dreams. And the pattern I see again and again is that in their childhood, no adults paid attention to who they were. And there may have been abuse and neglect, but particularly insidious is the damage done when parents don't see or validate what is unique and lovable about this particular child. And I suspect that parents recognizing the unique character of their children is crucial to development. We need that. And my letter today is from a woman I'll call Sonia, and she writes, "Dear Anna, I've been watching a lot of your videos and they certainly resonate with me. I really like the idea of writing down what my dream life would look like." That's at the beginning of my dating course, which you can find down in the description section. She says, "So I found a nice big pad of paper and my favorite pen, and I started. And after I'd written down some things I'd like to have, I realized that I haven't got the faintest clue what I want to do with my life. I've never had any idea, and I still don't have. I don't know what, if anything, I'm good at, and I don't feel passionate about anything." Okay, so I've got my fairy pencil. I'm going to circle things that I want to come back to in a second reading. But let's read Sonia's letter all the way through and see what's going on. Okay. She says, "If I could just win the lottery, I'd be on Easy Street, traveling around a bit, seeing interesting things, putting my daughter through college, and getting out of my lackluster marriage. As it is, I can barely function. I get up and I go through the motions because I have to. I make myself carry on, mostly for my daughter's sake, but I feel my life is over, really. I'm 56, and I'm just so tired of everything. I don't want to do anything. Being richer would make life easier, as I never have enough money to get from one payday to the next, but I don't know if it would make me any happier in myself. I just don't have a clue what I should do next. Just raising my daughter, doing the housework, and trying to keep my head above water financially seems like enough without adding anything else. I can remember when I was 14, she says, telling my mother that I didn't feel I had any identity. There it is. That I had no idea who I was, and she didn't have anything to say about that. I think she told me to stop being silly, but the truth is that I still feel like that today. I was always good at drama at school because I could really inhabit a character. It gave me someone to be. My history is that I was born in the mid-60s in the UK. My parents were both spoilt, as they say. They were only children, and their relationship was violent and abusive from the get-go. They had been only married for a year when I was born, and they were not ready for me. They both worked, so they left me to be looked after by a neighbor who lived in the same building until I was 6 months old. And then when she couldn't look after me anymore, my grandparents stepped in and took me to live in the countryside with them. My grandparents were good people, says Sonia. They loved me and I loved them, and I think they tried to do the right thing, but when they took me back to live with my parents a year later, it was very traumatic. My grandmother told me that I was just learning to talk, but when I went back to my parents, who were like strangers to me, I stopped talking completely for quite some time. I think my mother tried to love me at this point, but I was not the child she had hoped for. Somehow I just didn't fit the bill. And then she got pregnant with my brother, and he became her all and everything, and she told me later that he was an easier child. She just couldn't relate to me. I don't have a lot of memories of this time, but I do remember feeling a bit hurt that she wouldn't let me help to give my baby brother his bottle. I wanted to help look after him, but she wouldn't let me get involved. She had to have this exclusive relationship with him, and no one else was allowed in. And one reason for this was probably the hellish relationship she had with my father, who would work out all his negative emotions on her. He was very violent. He was a sadistic person. He's dead now, and I don't think anyone misses him much. I can remember her getting beaten up in front of me before my brother was born. Oh, this took a while to mention. So I would have been no older than 3, and that carried on through my childhood. My brother and I used to sit together at the end of the bed listening, paralyzed with fear, to the shouting and screaming coming from downstairs. I don't know what he thought, but I used to wonder if we would find her lying there dead the next morning. What I could honestly never understand was why, even if she didn't feel able to leave him on her own account, why didn't she leave him to protect us kids. We used to get hit too, and honestly, the mental and emotional abuse was far worse than the physical abuse. He was a really mean person who used to get off on our pain and discomfort. He used to laugh when we cried. He really thought it was funny. I know it was the 70s, and there would have been some stigma attached to being a divorced single mother, but my grandparents were alive then. I think they would have helped her. Certainly she could have gone there in the first instance, but she didn't. She stayed with him, and we all had to endure his BS. Another low point was a period when I was left with a childminder, a babysitter, all day. When my mother went back to work after having my brother, I was about 3 years old, and I used to watch her walk away down the road from behind the garden gate and feel that my heart was leaving with her. The childminder was a really horrible, uncaring person, and I was terribly unhappy. And the other kids there didn't like me and wouldn't let me play with them. And the worst of it was that although I begged my mother not to take me back there, she ignored me and left me there again and again. I think that was where I really started to feel the deep sadness that characterized my entire childhood. I knew, even at that young age, that my mother was not going to protect me and I would have to rely on myself. And I did, and I still do. But there is a part of me that just wants to put down this heavy load. My grandmother told me it was very obvious to everyone how my mother favored my brother over me. I don't remember much about it except to say that when I was about 5 or 6, I used to regularly get very upset when my mother would spend half an hour each evening saying goodnight to my brother and then just call out a quick goodnight to me on her way downstairs without even coming in to kiss me. One evening, I decided that I should probably go into my brother's room to join them if I wanted to be included in the fun, and that it was my fault rather than my mother's. But as I entered the room, they stopped laughing and joking and fell silent. All I could do was leave again and go back to my lonely bed. Oh, this is so sad. Another time I will always remember is when my mother had some fruitcake, which was my favorite at the time. And she divided it so unfairly between my brother and me, giving him the lion's share, obviously. And I said it was completely unfair and that I wouldn't eat it. And you know what she did? She told me to stop being ridiculous and forced me to eat the cake. It was incredibly humiliating. Of course, my brother is seeing all this and learning that I'm a person of no worth at all, a nobody. In fact, when he got older, he assaulted me. He felt he had every right. And as he said at the time, there was no point in telling our parents because I would not have been believed. That was very true. My parents didn't believe anything I ever said. He got the message that he was the good child and I was the black sheep. And even though I don't think I did anything to deserve that, when I did well, for example, I won an end-of-the-year school prize for story writing. You are a good writer. And got given a big silver trophy with my name on it. My mother disregarded it completely. She certainly never congratulated me. She acted as if nothing had happened at all. In fact, all my life, I've wondered just what I would have to do to get her attention. I used to wonder if I murdered someone, she would notice me then. And I think that although my father's abuse was more obvious, it was the subtle, undermining quality of my mother's abuse that had the more lasting effect on me. My father, you could just write off as a nutter, but my mother was very charming and delightful in company. So no one would ever have believed that she was capable of being utterly cruel and heartless behind closed doors. Even now, my brother acts very pompous and entitled, and I'm still just a nobody in their eyes. They belittle everything I do and begrudge me whatever success I've had in life. When something goes wrong with me, I think they're happy as if that were the natural order of things, and therefore everything is right with the world. They're so toxic that I actually made the decision to cut ties with them completely a few years ago after yet another hurtful incident, and for the most part, it's been a relief. I did try sending my mother a birthday card, when she turned 80, and it just said, "Thinking of you on your special day with love." But I got no answer, and she has never phoned me ever. It always had to be me. So in the end, I just stopped. And guess what? They were outraged, as if, how dare I do that? But this is my life, and I'll do as I see fit. At least that much is my right. Well, that's my story. What do you think, Anna? Why am I feeling this inertia now that's stopping me from moving forward or even looking at the future with any kind of enthusiasm? What can I do about it? Best wishes. All right. From Sonia. All right, Sonia, gosh, This was very sad. I was near tears as I was reading this. It's a very sad letter. And I don't know yet if you've had a chance to tell your story before and get heard and get validated about this, but just in case this is the first time, it's very easy to see that you were gravely traumatized, and any problems that you're having at all could easily be traced to what happened to you. However, that doesn't help us, does it? What caused it is in the past, and it was with another person who you don't want contact with anyway. All your healing now is going to come from within in present time. So what I want to do is I want to go through and talk about what you told me, just to get to really be thorough with the validation, so that at the end of this process of reading this letter, we can send you on your way to begin working on you to rebuild and fill your well and change your life so that you begin to have joy and identity in what you do. It's not too late. You're about the age I was when I started Crappy Childhood Fairy. So I'm just saying, being in your mid-50s, no big deal. Many things can happen in your life at that point and later. So this was interesting. You said if I could just win the lottery, I'd be on Easy Street and I'd travel around and I could get out of my lackluster marriage, which you only mention here once, I think, that you're in a marriage that's dull, and but you can barely function. And you say being richer would make my life easier, and it's true. Having some money makes life easier up to a point. And you're right, it wouldn't really solve the problem of your identity. Money is not the thing that it's not the thing that is causing the emptiness inside. It could be a symptom of the emptiness inside, but it's not the cause. So I love that you were good in drama school, that you could really inhabit a character. That's what a lot of us do. We take the wound that we have and we do something incredibly creative with it. And there's nothing wrong with that. And one of the things I want you to write down is to consider going back to acting classes, because it does give you joy and it does give you a forum to inhabit a character who can express herself, right? And my history, you said, okay, in the 60s, this thing where your mom worked and the fighting and the violent relationship and her physical and emotional abandonment of you, I was thinking, oh, maybe it's postpartum depression. But then when the brother came along and she was so into him. I mean, one thing I've heard, I'm not a therapist, but I've heard that narcissistic parents sometimes shun children of the same gender. That doesn't work for them because that's competition. And so that's possible. But I don't really want to take this conversation on, was your mom a narcissist? It sounds like possibly. I mean, something was clearly wrong with her. But it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what was wrong with her. What happened, what matters right now is the consequences to you, the symptoms in your life that you're experiencing right now that are holding you back from being fully yourself and enjoying your life, enjoying your time on earth. It's your time on earth just as much as anybody. So we want to help you have that. And she's just like, she's out of the picture now. Thank goodness her damage is done. And now you can clean that up and move on. But here's what you told me about them. So you went to some neighbor, then you went to the grandparents, and that was nice. And they loved you and they were good people. That reminds me, there's a movie called The Quiet Girl, if you haven't seen it. The Quiet Girl. It's an Irish movie about a girl who goes and lives with relatives for a while. It's beautiful, not too triggering, and you might enjoy it. Your mom took you back. You had to go back to her, and you were very sad, and you were just learning to talk. And when you went back, you lost the ability to talk. So just for reference, I have a friend whose mother took her own life when my friend was 15 months old, was just beginning to talk, and the same thing happened. He stopped talking for quite a long time. And that's what trauma's like. It just hijacks natural brain development. And that abandonment by loving people who were reflecting back to you. I suspect your grandparents were giving you face-to-face contact and babbling with you and enjoying you and looking you in the eyes and playing with you. And to lose that was a great blow and injury to your neurological development. And I'm just going to say that is one possibility of where your detachment from a sense of identity came from. That's such a tender age. I don't know what age you were, but you were just learning to talk. So you were somewhere between 1 and 2 years of age, I guess, maybe a little bit older. Your mother tried to love you, but at some point you just weren't the one she wanted, and she got pregnant with your brother. And you know what? I'll just disclose. I had something similar. Girls were not favored in my family, and it wasn't. I think you had much harder things happen to you. I'll just say that, but it is very hard. It's sometimes worse than physical abuse because you just think and think like, what am I doing to cause this? How can I win them over? Aren't I good enough? You know, it drives your whole life. That becomes your identity, is like just trying to get seen, right? But he was violent to her. So I'm not excusing her terrible negligence towards you. I suppose in that time and place, if she was having trouble bonding with her child, and that happens sometimes, even to people who mean well and who are capable of doing a good job parenting, she was in a violent relationship. And so I can just see a lot of factors here that are whatever was in her makeup about how she handled and why she stayed with the abuser. She was deep in a trauma bond, so she was irrational. And a trauma bond is where somebody's alternatingly nice and mean and nice and mean, and these horrible fights occur, and then you make up. And it can lead to this very tight bond. And the thing is, you don't have to be a narcissist to respond to that. Even dogs respond to that, right? It's like this weird hack that's inside people. I don't want to say hack. I'm trying to get over this computer language about people. We're not computers. But it's a manipulative thing that even a healthy person can become extremely attached to somebody who does it's called intermittent reinforcement, you know, you're wonderful, I love you, get away from me. And growing up around violence, it's just so much of that. And as a child, and I grew up around violence too, it's like when it's bad, you get out of the way. And when it's good, you creep in with this huge hope, like it's going to be okay now. And maybe I can hidey them. I call it hiding them. You know, I'll just be so sunshine and rainbows that they will patch things up. And I would beg them, you know, please, mommy and daddy. A kid wants the parents to work it out. So everybody becomes invested in sticking it out when it's so terrible. So it doesn't excuse what she did, but it could explain it, right? What a horrible situation. And then your dad being a sadist, and that he laughed when you cried and he thought it was funny when you were crying and getting hit. And yes, divorced single moms in the 70s had a little stigma, but not really. Like that's when it was really getting going, unless you were in some, like up in the north or a rural area or something. The 70s is when divorce was, really coming through on a wave, and your grandparents would have helped. So I'm just going to say she had abused woman syndrome. She couldn't leave, and that is not uncommon. And it's a shame, because from the outside, it's like, how could you stay when the kids are being so damaged by this? And it was just beyond her. It's sort of like something like alcoholism, where you think, how can you keep drinking when it hurts the kids so much? But they can't stop. It's like such a compulsion. And so I don't know if that helps you or anything, but it does explain the strange lying and fake, shallow, that thing where you walked into the room to go, maybe it's me and I can just join in on the story, and they just looked at you in silence. I don't know why that hit me the hardest. As if, like, what are you doing here? As if you weren't even real, like you weren't a real child. That'll do it. That'll do it, Sonia. If you're having trouble knowing who you are now, like, you have ample reasons how this could have happened to you. But you are a real person. These are injuries, but you actually are a full and real person. So take heart. We'll go through this. So you went to some babysitter and you had to watch your mother walk away, and you got permanently sad. Yeah. And your grandmother validated you, and she said it was obvious, and you won a prize for story writing. And I just want to say, I heard that, and congratulations, bravo. Winning a prize in story writing is a formidable accomplishment. And your letter here is poignant and beautiful and well written. I think you're a great writer. And we have a couple of clues here. You like acting and you like writing. You're very talented as a writer. I haven't seen you act, but you said it went very well for you. So acting and writing, I mean, those are really fun things to get involved with. The Crappy Childhood Fairy blog, fundamentally I'm a writer. I started with a blog. I made a video to show things. I prep these videos. I write my intros. I'm writing a book. I'm a writer too, and I always was as a kid. And So when you think writer, don't think it has to be journalist or it has to be any one type of writer. Writing is part of every creative endeavor and every communication endeavor. And there is so much room in this world for good writers like you. So this thing was very telling that your father came off as crazy, a nutter, as they say in Britain. And your mother was charming and delightful in company. That is a certain type. Yeah, and the people in the comments can comment on that and tell you what they think is going on there. So even now your brother is pompous and entitled. Yeah, it ruined him too, it sounds like. And you are nobody to him, so you wrote them off, and good. Then you had a little slip and you sent your mother a birthday card, thinking of you on your special day with love. And I'm all for keeping the door open to having a relationship with people you cut off. But in this case, the way you write it and how bad it was, it feels to me like a little relapse where the hope came back that maybe if you were kind enough, she would see how good you are and she would go, oh, what have I done to you? What have I done to you, Sonia? You were always such a good girl and so talented and you didn't do anything wrong and I'm so sorry. And she didn't. You got no answer and she never phoned you. You know, when people have made horrible mistakes and mistreated their kids, it seems more often than not, they do stop calling and they stay away. And if you ask them about what happened, it's not going to go well because they literally cannot handle the information that they did that. They feel so bad, but these are people who are so emotionally stunted. They have no mechanism for, recognizing what they did, having contrition and conscious about it, and saying something about, I recognize what that did to you, and I am so very sorry. Can you forgive me? It's not like that. She can't do it. I'll leave it in the comments, and I know there are therapists in the audience too, so, please share with us your observations about this mother, what's going on. So you're saying to me, why am I feeling this inertia now that's stopping me from moving forward or even looking at the future with any kind of enthusiasm? That actually sounds to me like the freeze response, and it's very common. Fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And freeze sounds like what's happening with you, and people become immobilized. The opposite is people get very amplified. They get either, fighty, they want to attack, they're angry, or they become over-functioners. You're under-functioning. So over-functioners, they're like, I just never stop working, I'm going to do so many great things, my parents will finally love me. You're under-functioning, and it's just one role that kids play. You didn't choose it, it's just kind of how things played out. And you can heal that by working on your nervous system health. There's a couple ways you can do that. There's physical means like yoga, dance, martial arts. There's courses you can take online with some very good practitioners out there. One I really like is Irene Lyon, Lyon, and she teaches a step-by-step process to reactivate and come back out of the freeze response, and it's very good. She knows what she's talking about. She's got a nice style that's good for traumatized people. Over in my program, you can learn the daily practices, which is where you can start to deal with the fearful, resentful thoughts that come up and clutter your mind and make it really hard to see clearly, like, what do I want? What would I like to try next? This, I think, is the secret to becoming your true self, is you begin to experiment with it. It takes experimentation, and you were denied in the level of supervised experimentation that proper parenting is supposed to include. So you get to do it for yourself now. You've played your role, you've lived your life, you have this marriage, everything is lackluster about it. There's not money. You'd like to leave. You can't imagine, when you were trying to write down the ideal life, you couldn't do it. And I hear that a lot. So just know you're not alone. That is something that happens. There's just this big void there, a void of unconsciousness. And maybe it's because it was just too much for you. You had too much going on to really develop that. Or being in freeze response, there's a part of your brain that's not switched on right now, but it's there, Sonia. You do have that part of you, and it's activated through practice. So one thing that happens when we live our lives in trauma is we have to start making our lives very small to cope. When you don't have good tools or support to start healing your symptoms, and most people are walking around, they have no idea. For most of my life, I had no idea. People would go, oh, you need to heal. And I'd be like, I agree, but how? How do you do that? And so we know so much more now about how to do it. And so you need some curiosity. But I get it, when you're frozen, when you feel paralyzed in the house, like you can't get up, you can't leave, you can't find the energy to motivate, you need to begin with one thing, an exercise that begins to function like WD-40, right? To decalcify your thoughts and intentions. For me, that is the daily practice technique. It's a set of techniques where you write your fears and resentments twice a day. It's a special format that's designed to release them. It's not just naming them. We name them, but it's all a process of releasing, followed by resting and meditation, which allows your brain to put itself back together. And gradually over time, sometimes in big bursts too, which are pretty fun, things come to you. Healing comes to you. Something all of a sudden that was hard, it gets easy. Something that was unclear becomes clear. Something that you had no picture of, all of a sudden the picture comes to you. And that's a very good thing, is to start activating and receiving information from within yourself about who you actually are and what you want to be doing. Every single person has gifts to bring to the world. And when we can't, the whole world is suffering for lack of it. I mean, the world has a lot of problems. So let's just say that maybe your gift has to do with writing, or it has to do with performing. Maybe it's something like that. That's, not dissimilar to what I'm doing. And I'm able to experience joy from what I do, but also I feel like I make a contribution to the world. And that's really where happiness begins. Everybody's meant to make a contribution. And everybody. And that's where the joy begins, is when you're doing the thing that you were really made to do. And sometimes we just have to do a stand-in. Like, I used to take carts at the grocery store from the parking lot, ones that they weren't even my cart, but I'd bring them back. I would just do something that was a contribution, because just doing one little thing can help bring you back from that depressed, frozen place, and start to introduce just a little ray of sunshine, a little bit of happiness back in your life. So I have some suggestions for people. In addition to taking my daily practice, which is free, and there's a link down below, I'm going to leave you with a download about how to feel happier. And it's about steps that you can take to start introducing some happy feeling into yourself, into your day, into your life, so that you just have a little bit to go on, so that you can take that next step. It's one step at a time. Your English, one foot in front of, chin up, one foot in front of the other. My husband is English, and he said that to me back when I first met him, and I had no work. I was losing my house. It was 2009. Things were pretty grim in America, and I was a single mom, and but I was dating this very nice guy who ended up later being my husband. And he used to say, come on, chin up, one foot in front of the other. And that was kind of different than the California thing of like, oh, what are your feelings? How does what did your mom do? And I'm not making fun of that. Like, we all need to look at that. But when you were telling me what was wrong, you were very, very in touch with what had happened to you. You were beautifully in touch with what had happened to you. You had great insight. I feel like you're in a good place with that. And, perhaps you're working with a therapist, or you will again, or perhaps. But whatever you decide to do, begin to take action now to start to bring happiness into your life. Little bits of joy, just a little burst. Do you know those little candies? Well, in England, they have those pastilles. They're like tart, and they give your mouth like a little, that's how happiness, just a little bite of happiness to come in and energize your day a little bit, to start moving on, to go one foot in front of the other with your chin up. People who were neglected in childhood often grow up with a false sense of identity that they were pressured into developing by parents who couldn't see who they were at all. And this is a pattern I've come to recognize in hundreds of letters I've received. There's you could almost call it a developmental delay in forming a sense of self, of knowing, what are your preferences? What makes you happy? What do you long for? And some people, they just imprint on another person, a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And other people, they'll just burn out. They burn themselves out by trying and trying to somehow make the vision for them that their parents put on them feel good and make them happy, but it doesn't work. And so they're enraged, which is not a good frame of mind, and it doesn't lead to a good life. So my letter today is from a woman I'll call Mercy. And she writes, "Hi, Anna. I am a nurse in my early 20s, and I've been doing this work for 3 years, and it's pushed me to the point that I feel I cannot go on." All right, she's saying other words that are quite desperate, and I don't want to say them on YouTube, but I think you know where she's coming from. She says, I lash out at my parents who are nicer now, but still don't fully comprehend that I'm a person and the things they did impacted me forever. All right, so there's the identity wound. I've got the fairy pencil here. I'm going to circle things I want to come back to on a second reading, but let's see what Mercy can describe for us here. She says, I isolate in my real life. I stay mentally stuck on people who are not good for me, and I can't handle dealing with family conflict because it sends me into female rage. Female rage, huh? I think I know what she means, but I'm not sure. Now I only have my one best friend, who now lives several states away. We were new graduate nurses together, and we don't see each other very often. My little sister doesn't talk to me after I told her I didn't have the emotional capacity to deal with her new relationship problems right after she ended a years-long relationship with a toxic man who was also close to our family. I'm going to circle that. I might want to come back to that. A major abandonment in my life was when I was 16, after going to school in one country for 6 years. I was told I was doing the SATs in a week, had to take it without a proper preparation, and my parents didn't let me eat before this exam or take snacks to the exam. And then they made me get on a plane at age 16 to go start nursing school back in the United States. Yeah, it's pretty extreme. I had been away from the United States since I was 7, and when I tried to change my major, they cut me off financially. I had to stay with this major or drop out and be on the streets. Wow. I have zero empathy for people who remind me of my father. I feel rage when I meet someone who acts like my mother, despite me often repeating the same patterns and behaviors as them. My little sister physically fought our mother as a teenager, but I'm still labeled the problem child for lashing out emotionally. I know it's not right, and I'm trying to stop altogether, but I can't tell if I'm just cutting off my family for good, if that would be the easiest thing for me to live my life peacefully. I'm so extremely messed up and dysregulated and isolated, and I use my sports to release some emotion and feel happy again. I just still feel so much rage toward my parents and younger sister. We moved to 3 continents as I grew up and went from stable to well-off to dirt poor in the span of 4 years. My family was dealing with their own mental issues, but these were my important developmental years. I was completely abandoned. They got angry when I cried, shamed for anything I did or tried to do. They made fun of my eyebrows, my figure, me being fat, which I wasn't, my endless skin problems, which turned out to be an autoimmune skin disorder that required 6 months of Accutane and dietary changes as a teenager to control. They constantly compared me to my excellent older sister and bullied me for my body shape and weight and consequent eating problems. And the bullying came from my mom and younger sister, who still to this day can't understand why I can't eat normally. Not to mention, we happen to be part of a very specific and extreme denomination of Christianity that combined with the African immigrant culture, it was a cult-like environment for years upon years. Okay, that's a lot. The only constant I had was drawing and reading, because I could carry that from continent to continent. I was always the new kid, and a lot of others didn't like me. I just wanted to be normal, and I thought I was, but now looking back, normal adults must have easily seen I was not an okay kid. A lot of people I love have tried to end their lives. So if this is like really strong triggering for you, just skip over the next minute here. And I will say that Mercy had a lot of this. She says, I stopped my older sister from doing it on the way to school when I was 13. My close friend from age 11 to 14 actually did do it successfully when we were 14. And I stopped my mother, she says, who was diagnosed with bipolar, borderline personality disorder, and depression. She stopped her mother from doing it when she was just 12. Gosh. This has been a constant theme in my family, and it always seems it has been my job to stop it. All right, this we're going to circle. I feel like this is a significant thing in what's going on for you. My dad constantly cheated, had children outside the marriage, and clearly used my mother to socially climb when they first got together. I have zero respect for him, and I'm exhausted by every conversation we have leaning toward why he needs to start a business. Nursing makes everything worse. I do not want to endlessly pour myself into patients who constantly shout at me, belittle me, make false accusations. I would never take any emotion out on my patients, but it catches me off guard when a patient and I connect over many days of me taking care of them, and then we relate in a way that I wished my mother and I could have. When they leave, they often express gratitude, and it warms my heart to see them heal and get discharged and go home, but I just cry afterwards. Wow. And I can't fully figure out why. I'd rather have the latter group of patients, the ones who connect, than the first, but both of them destabilize me emotionally as much as the other. All right, that's a key right there. My anti-anxiety medication dose is already maxed out, which I've had to increase with every year of me being a nurse. All right, there's another indicator. When I get to these levels of anxiety, I can't eat. I can't eat, and it affects my sports. I think I've been using sports as a somatic therapy from a young age because I wasn't allowed to cry. Good plan. I feel like I'm limiting myself by being unable to connect with other people. My family is so scattered. I have only made one good friend since becoming a nurse because I'm otherwise emotionally and physically exhausted. I do not trust men even when they're good because of my dad being a wolf in sheep's clothing. Well, but I crave a healthy romantic relationship with a man I can lean on, and I feel overwhelmed when someone shows signs of wanting to connect, mainly women, because I'm so tired out, I haven't started unpacking connection with men yet. Oh boy. I'm limiting myself by remaining in financial disarray that resembles my upbringing, but keeps me in this career that makes me want to walk in front of a train every day. Oh, goodness. I'm limiting myself by not moving on romantically. I'm limiting myself by letting the past control every aspect of my now life. How can I move forward from this? Mercy. Okay, Mercy, I'm so sorry. This is a very hard letter to read, and I first just kind of want to gather all the love and all the care of all the people who are listening to this letter around, and would you please put into the comments some love for this young woman, because she's going through a really hard time and she's very alone. And but we're your witness now, Mercy. We heard you. We heard you. I'm so glad you're here. Your life is so important, and your job is so not worth the loss of anything. And I'm so glad you allowed us to come and intervene right now and befriend you and support you in making whatever changes you need to have more peace in your life and to be safe. So first of all, I'm going to address what came up at the end where you listed all these things where you say, I'm limiting myself because I can't connect. I'm limiting myself because I'm letting the past control me. I'm limiting myself because I'm in financial disarray. And I hope you know, Mercy, that everything that you say you're doing to yourself is actually a symptom of early trauma. It's a symptom. You're not actually doing it to yourself. It was done to you. And I totally understand that now that the damage has been done, it's you who has to make the changes in your life. And we're going to talk about that. But I just want to start off by saying you are not limiting yourself. You're actually doing amazing things of showing up for this job. You got this education even though you didn't choose it. You got sent away at 16 to a foreign country. I mean, this sounds incredibly brutal to me. But you did it. You are surviving. You're here. You're able to do the job. And also, what you described on the job, and I'm not trying to say that you should necessarily stay in the job at all, but just that you have made a difference in a lot of patients' lives. They connect with you. And I know it's emotionally overwhelming, and maybe even my saying this to you is going to overwhelm you too. What I'm hearing is a woman, this is you, I'm hearing a person who all emotions are overwhelming, that you, if you have CPTSD, and I don't see how you couldn't, you sure are showing the signs. What happened to you is severe enough that
most people would develop it. So that's normal. I mean, some people, they can just live through anything and they just go forward like nothing happened. But I'm not one of those people, and I don't think you are either. And that's okay. What's reacting to all of this is the beautiful, alive, sensitive parts of ourselves that we're never really cut out to be unloved and not seen and forced, and that was never your destiny. But that's what you got. You got a bad hand of cards. And it's tempting to try to compare yours and say, well, at least it wasn't that, but it's worse than that. It's just, we each get our hand of cards and we deal with what we have. Now, you're in your early 20s, and I sometimes think that's one of the hardest ages to be with trauma, because the past is still coming at you like a tide that won't go out, The waves just keep coming in. You're still at the effect of your parents. You're still thinking that somehow if you perform well enough or tolerate what they told you to do well enough, that they will suddenly turn nice. But what you told me about them is like, well, your mom, she has, some serious mental health problems. And they're problems that normally drive apart marriages and families under the best of circumstances. So, I'm just going to throw out there, if you're not familiar with borderline personality disorder, I encourage you to look it up, not because I think you have it, but when you tell me your mom had it along with depression and bipolar, that is so much. And there's a TV show I love called The Bear, and in season 2, you get to meet the mother, who I believe is meant to, it's a dramatization of what it's like when a mother has borderline personality disorder, and it's Christmas. And it's an episode not to miss if you are strong and you want to see what another family looks like with that kind of person and see if you relate. And it's not very scientific watching a TV show, but for me, it was really helpful. I have somebody in my past who I think had it. And when I saw that, it really, I was like, there it is. Yes, that's what it was. I see that. So I think the writers of that show knew what it was like. You are still sitting there trying to live up to the expectations of somebody who has a completely unstable reality, who alternately says, I love you, you're great, and then blames you for every problem on earth. And that's what I hear. They made you into the black sheep, even though your sister would hit. It's interesting that you got to be the black sheep. And I don't know what, I was the black sheep too. And my misbehavior was nothing compared to my older brother, who stole all the drugs in the house and got violent and created huge scenes every holiday. And I was like, why me? And I used to battle against it too and just be like, can't you see? I'm a good kid. I'm not so terribly bad. I made a couple mistakes. And the family members who have survived, I'm a lot older than you, but the family members who have survived gradually did come around, and we never talked about it the way they kind of thought I wasn't so great or used to exclude me. We just didn't talk about it because whatever they used to think isn't true, and I don't even want to entertain it. I'm just really glad we can have friendly relationships right now, and maybe you'll have that one day, but you don't have to, Mercy. Some people. You asked me in the beginning of the letter, actually, Mercy put a question at the beginning that I didn't read, and it was like, do I cut my family off? And here's what I say about that. Anybody can cut their family off one day at a time. To decide to do it forever is an other decision that you may want to get to too, but you can try it from one day at a time. And you don't even have to make a big announcement about it. You can just do it. You can just do it and not get back to them. And I think I don't know, you didn't specify, are you financially free and clear now that you're a nurse? Do you have your own money? Even though it sounds to me like you need to get out of this career, or at least this job. I know that some nursing jobs, like hospital nursing jobs, can be much more stressful than certain other nursing jobs. A friend of mine works in a private practice doctor's office as a nurse, and that's a lot more livable than working in a hospital was. I don't know how you're going to work it out. Maybe you'll change your career. Maybe you'll use your knowledge in a lower pressure thing that's more meaningful to you. We'll find out. Time will tell. I encourage you to go ahead and take small actions on that. And one small action might be to take some time without contact with your family. they used to control you with money. Like, you can't change majors or you end up out on the street. And when I first read that, I kind of missed the part. I had to read it a second time to go, you were 16, because at first I was like, well, you were an adult, so if they don't want to fund your education, go get a job and you're okay. But I get it. 16, I don't know. I don't even know who was looking after you. I can totally understand why that was a survival move for you. So you know what? Good, you survived. You did what you had to do to get through that period of time. And now that you're in your early 20s, you can stand on your own feet. And even if you never do a nursing job another day in your life, you can go wait tables. You can go deliver stuff for Amazon. You know, there's jobs that you can do to get by until you find your career again that is meaningful and pays a fair and adequate amount of money for you to live on, which, don't forget, it's important to have enough money. People don't talk about that enough with trauma. I think sometimes the professionals who function as experts to help people with trauma, forget, being really poor totally limits your choices. How many of us have had to stay in terrible relationships because we couldn't afford to move out, right? So we always want to have that flexibility to be able to make choices in our lives about what we do. We don't need to be wealthy, but it's good to have choices, enough money to have choices. Also, I think work can be a really powerful way of path of self-growth, of self-knowledge, of empowerment of yourself. And I've always, I haven't liked every job I've had, but overall I've really liked working in my life. My husband and I were talking about the future and, when would we retire? And right now I can't really imagine it, because for me, work has finally become just kind of what I like to do. I think I would work less than I do right now, but I'd still do what I do. And I'd like a little more time to smell the roses. And, maybe the day will come when we can afford to do that, goof off a little more. But I really love my work. And so my work energizes me. And I totally know what it's like. I have been in jobs before where you come home and you are just so exhausted emotionally and physically. You can't possibly deal with people. And that's got to go, Mercy. That's not a good way to live. That's an emergency measure sometimes. Let's say where you work has just been through a fire or something. I used to work in healthcare, and we had that. We had clinics burned down, and we all had to get to that clinic and help them kind of create a temporary setup and deal with the patients and things like that. And it would be exhausting. And I still have photos of everybody sitting there going, everybody was so wiped out at the end of the night. That's an emergency. That's not a way to live. Now, here's what I know about nurses, because I did used to work in healthcare, and because I was in the hospital off and on for 4 years with a whole bunch of surgeries. I had a medical complication that needed a lot of surgery. I've talked about it a little in other videos, but oh my gosh. I met a lot of nurses over those times, cumulative many months in the hospital. And the night shift and the day shift kind of have a different personality. And a few nurses, they're just like angels. They come up and they talk to you, or they put a hand on you, and you just sit there, you're just healing, and it's so powerful. And they should be nurses, and they are very important. And there's a few nurses who are just vicious and awful, and I wonder if they got forced into the job. Not saying you're vicious and awful, but it's not everybody. Everybody who does it doesn't have a gift of healing, I'll tell you that. Now, some people, they have a gift more of clinical measurement or management or things. So you may find a gift within this career that you've already developed. Maybe you will, but you have my permission to just let go. You don't have to drive so hard. I know you need to make the rent and, come up with enough money to pay the bills. And I know you can. I just can hear in your letter that your anger is it's a lot of energy. That anger is a lot of energy. And the terrible thing about anger, it's kind of like heating up your house to 80 degrees and leaving the front door open. It's just spilling out all over. You can't use that energy for what you need. And so anger is often a way that we're kind of unconsciously coming up from depression. And I'm hearing all this anxiety and depression. And I relate to you so much. My early 20s were full of that too. I was just so torn up with anxiety and depression. And I was also doing, really good accomplishments, but I can say for myself, and this may be true for you, I had a lot of childhood trauma that there was no room to process. I didn't really have an environment where I could do that, or a knowledge framework where I could do that. I tried therapy a little bit, and we would talk about my mom, but I just kept experiencing it as very upsetting and disruptive to do that. And I was 30 before I found something that actually helped me, the minute I used it, to actually get comforted and grounded. So getting grounded, getting calmer, having relief emotionally from intense feelings, this is gold when you're in that state of anxiety. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I'm going to encourage you to talk to your doctor or get a second opinion about being maxed out on anxiety drugs and feeling as bad as you do. That sounds to me like you were given a temporary solution that is not holding up as a permanent solution. And there may be a way to change how you're doing that, whether it's to reduce or change medication or get off of them. Now, if you got interested in how to re-regulate your nervous system to become emotionally regulated, which is good for all kinds of people, but especially for traumatized people, then it might be in your best interest to be less medicated. But it's one of those things, when you're prescribed that kind of drugs, you can't just go wing it, freelance, and change your dose. It has to be done with a doctor's supervision. So I encourage you to check that out. And if your doctor isn't supportive of you exploring that, do get a second opinion. Many doctors are supportive of that kind of thing. Lots of people can't live on maximum dose anti-anxiety. The thing about anything mind-altering is that, we all get dysregulated sometimes, all people, not just traumatized people. And eventually, almost all of us will re-regulate. There's a few exceptions of people who can never get re-regulated. But I don't think that's you. I think you can get re-regulated, and you probably do it. But the more you get ground down and demoralized, and the more your mind is altered on substances and stress and grief, the harder it is to re-regulate, and you start to kind of lose that ability, and it starts to feel normal to be totally dysregulated all the time, discombobulated, numb, feeling emotions too strongly in a context, having to suppress yourself. And I have seen in people who use drugs daily, like weed daily, there will often be a huge buildup of anger. Anger is really never getting processed. It gets out, it's expressed, I'm so angry, but it doesn't go away. So processing feelings isn't just expressing them, it's actually turning them into memories of the feeling of that it's active for a while and then it shifts to a new phase. So when we get traumatized as kids, we get an injury to that function within our nervous system that does that service for us, where it takes emotions and thoughts that come up, they come up strong, and it takes them, helps us think about them, and then they get moved into a different part of our mind and nervous system, which is memory. Active experiences, that's what gives you adrenaline, makes your heart beat, cortisol, keeps you up at night. That's something you're going through right now. If you can't process your thoughts and feelings, they just feel like they're all going on right now. And it gets to be so noisy. So something new happens, a new piece of information, good or bad, a new relationship, a new opportunity comes along, and there's barely any bandwidth to deal with it, to respond to it. So it's hard. We lose opportunities. We struggle to connect. And I'm not surprised at all that you're isolating from people to try to cope with it. You are in a state of overwhelm all the time. And I just want to tell you, you are just like so many of us. It is normal. You're having normal symptoms for somebody who went through what you went through. With your dad being dishonest and cheating and your mom being mentally ill like that, oh, that's a lot. That is so much. And then there was you and your sister, you trying to do enough that they would go, you know what, Mercy, you're a good girl. You're a good girl and I'm proud of you. And you may have never gotten that. So here you are, you're saying I have zero empathy for people who remind me of my father. That's a problem, projecting your father's behavior onto people who act like him. That's isolating you. I think somewhere in there is a red flag detector that's good, but it's just kind of blanket pushing people away. And you feel rage when you meet someone who acts like your mother, which doesn't surprise me. But again, between your mother and your father, you're going to see a lot of kind of energy of that around you. And you don't want to live in reaction to that. This is your precious life force. This is the energy that you will use to create your life, the one that you want, the relationships that you want, possibly a family, a place to live that makes you happy, that feels cozy and safe, friendships that are a joy for you with people who get you. Like, these are not crazy things to want to have, and you deserve them, but they're very hard to get when what the whole surface of you is projecting is anger and rage. And I know you know that, and I know that's why you're writing. You had asked, should you cut off your parents? And sometimes, well, I think yes, I think temporarily that might be okay to do. And again, it doesn't have to be forever. You don't have to put an end date on it. You can take it one day at a time, and that way it's not a major decision. And you can first experience, what's that like for me? Because what happens is when people are going through a lot of pain, and I know you are, you feel like you're on the brink. Making a huge decision like that when you've already been abandoned in your life can trigger abandonment melange, and that can make you even more vulnerable and put you in more like emotional danger of not being able to deal with it. And so right now, feeling grounded and stable should be top priority. Everything that makes you feel safe and stable. So you have this one friend, and I know she's far away, but I encourage you to make some time to get on Zoom and talk to her and stay connected to her. And maybe one of you takes a vacation very soon to go spend some time with the other and be with your friend. Now, more friends are needed. We need more than one. And one thing that you definitely qualify for is a program like ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Other Dysfunctional Families. And this program is terrific because basically everyone who watches this channel qualifies to go there. And they work specifically on practical tools to heal trauma. Some of it is similar to what I do in my program. Some of it's different and not stuff that has been personally helpful to me. It doesn't matter. You get in and you're around real people face to face, and they are working on changing their lives too. They've gone through things that are parallel or similar to what you've gone through. They understand. They don't freak out when you tell the truth about what you've lived through. And there may be other people who, had African immigrant parents. There may be other people who are in the nursing profession. There may be other people who relate to what you went through. And you can hear their story and how they are dealing with it. And sometimes just hearing somebody talk about it is all you need to stop judging yourself and saying, I'm screwing what was the words you kept saying here? I'm limiting myself. Yeah, no. The limiting was done for you. You're working to expand yourself right now. So don't get down on yourself. This is incredible. People who write a letter to me to read on YouTube, that's huge. You're not limiting yourself at all. You're just because what happens is there's always a few bozos who write completely cruel and stupid things in the comments, and I can't get them out fast enough, and you'll see them and they'll criticize you. But whatever you do, don't listen to those people. And any of you who are watching, you are hereby deputized. If you see somebody say something hateful to my letter writers, pile on. You tell them what a jerk they are, and when me or my team get there in the morning, we will take that person out. We don't want the haters. But every once in a while, we see their comments. I see them. It's so funny. They're so funny. Somebody criticized me today and said I didn't know anything about trauma. It would be better if I had ever experienced it. And I was just like, oy vey, come on now. I get mad, but what's the point? There's no point. You don't engage with the haters. Point is, you are so courageous because you wrote this letter here to get some help, and help is here. So 12-step meetings are where there's face-to-face people, and for anybody who thinks you might qualify for, there's a lot of ones that are for substance abuse. I went to one that was for families of alcoholics. ACA is for families of any kind of dysfunction. It's really powerful to be in a room with people who are all trying to get better from a similar thing, and I wouldn't be here without it. Spent 25 years in those rooms. Very helpful to me. But another thing you can do is come into my program. We have a membership program. It doesn't cost terribly much. You get all my courses. You get to come to our webinars every month for free. You get to join our secret Facebook group and come to my group coaching calls. And in the Facebook group, There's a lot of camaraderie and friendship, and you get to meet people with similar things. And it's a lovely, it kind of surprised me. It surprises me because there's a lot of people in there active, and by and large, they are so kind and thoughtful and helpful to each other. And then we do this thing called the daily practice. And I'm going to really if you do one thing that I'm talking to you about, try these daily practice techniques. It's a very specific writing technique followed by a simple form of meditation that anybody can do that can help bring that calm, that emotional relief in. And we do it twice a day. I needed it so bad. I was in a place similar to where you are now when I stumbled into it. And that was 30 years ago. And it's like my whole life now. I've got my book, Re-Regulated, coming out in a few months. It's all about what happened, what I learned to do. But I'm pointing you, Mercy, to the daily practice techniques. They're so important to healing because whatever else you're doing, if you're doing therapy, if you're doing exercise, I love that you do sports. That's so important. That's one of the most important things you can do to heal these trauma symptoms. So you have good instincts about what is needed here. There are a number of things you can do. So processing the thoughts and feelings consciously, cognitively with this technique that I teach, the daily practice, can be another thing that you do. And we have calls every week for anybody who wants to come for free, who's learned the daily practice on Zoom. Hundreds of people come. I lead 2 of them a month. My team leads 2 more every month. So every week we're there. But in the membership program, there's about 1,000 people, and 20-something of them are leading peer-led daily practice calls. So there's multiple calls every day where 10, 20, sometimes 30 people get together and do the techniques together and often become friendly with each other, and good things come from connecting with people who are working on healing just like you. So a link to membership is also down below in the description section. If anybody doesn't know what a description section is, underneath every video you start to see a little bit of writing and it'll say more, and you click on that and it opens. And like a lot of YouTubers, I have a whole bunch of information and links there for you. So check that out. A lot of good things there that you can learn. And when in doubt, come to my website, crappychildhoodfairy.com. Connect with people and resources that are helpful. Like, I hear you trying to do everything all by yourself, my dear, all by yourself. And that's hard. That's really hard. And I'm proud of you for being so self-sufficient. And I hope that you will let people like my community or 12-step or your friends, let them in a little bit to become your helpers. It's exhausting trying to do everything by yourself. I hear how tired you are, and I hope that with our care and our concern and love for you, that it gives you a little more energy back for you to take these next steps. There's a big mistake that people who were traumatized as kids make when they're trying to heal. And this is a bad mistake to make because it can stop your progress. And it's when you connect with help and other people who have complex PTSD, there is a temptation to identify as a traumatized person and focus heavily on what happened to you and what the diagnoses might be of the people who hurt you. You know, I'm an adult child, my father is a covert narcissist, my mom's a rage-filled codependent, and so on. And having a name for these things is an important part of healing, and it can be such a relief and feel good at first. It's an acknowledgement, it's some validation that yes, what happened to you was bad and would likely have affected anyone. But I want to tell you why I think it's a bad idea to allow trauma to be so central to your identity or your life story. And I know it's a huge deal, but I'm encouraging you not to let it define who you are. Trauma is an injury. It's not an identity. You are not your trauma. You are you. And that's a really important way of drawing a line between what happened to you in the past and all that you can be and where you're meant to go in your life. The whole point of trauma healing isn't just to feel better, but to be liberated, to become your full and real self. And you want to hold a place for that by developing your own sense of agency. Do you know that word? That's the power to make decisions and guide your own life. Agency. You didn't have that when you were a kid. And sometimes people manifest trauma with a sense of helplessness or the belief that struggles in their life today are always coming from other people. They don't have their agency developed yet. But it's actually empowering to recognize that a lot of our struggles come from ourselves.
I'm not blaming you for having problems. I'm actually happy for you if you do, because the problems that you create are the ones you can change. Now, personally, I think the focus of most clinical professionals, which is mostly on the past and other people, is a bit of a misappropriation of agency, because you can't change the past, and you have very little influence over other people, especially parents who may have abused you. Getting them to see what they did, or even better, getting them to change, it's extremely unlikely, honestly. So when you take those keys to your own healing, the place that you will focus your efforts, and you accidentally give it to past events or give it to other people by putting most of your healing focus there, well, you just lost the keys. And by definition, that's a loss of empowerment, a loss of agency. You can acknowledge and grieve and seek to understand what happened to you. That's part of healing. But that is the door. It's a door opening. It's not the final destination. There's more to the path. There's learning to heal your own neurological dysregulation, which is such a common symptom for people traumatized as kids. There's healing your disconnection from people, which is also a super common symptom of complex PTSD. And then learning to form loving relationships. Easier said than done. There's the awareness of your own self-defeating behaviors and the need to begin to change those. And then there's freeing yourself from old trauma-driven beliefs, like, for example, that you can only heal if your parents apologize. And I'm here to tell you, you can heal no matter what they do. And then there's coming into yourself and bringing your unique gifts to the world. And that's where healing really starts flowing. Your gifts turn from something you know about yourself to something that you do. It's a great joy when you find this and you start living it. So it's a terrible shame when people get stuck in the trauma identity. People are sometimes afraid to let that go for fear they'll have no armor, or that they won't have boundaries, or that their suffering will get the better of them. Or more often, given that we're dealing with emotional wounds that pressure you to be quiet and disappear, the trauma identity is one avenue where you get to speak up and be visible and be heard. Everybody needs that for a spell, but it can turn into a competition or an addiction. The antidote to identifying with your trauma is to identify with the vision of who you are and what you are becoming. And it involves facing the parts of your life where you're still making mistakes, where you're possibly hurting other people even, or at the very least, letting yourself down. Now, if you can't face yourself, or you deny that, like all people traumatized in childhood, you now are quite capable of re-traumatizing yourself, well, then you stay in a suspended animation of sorts. We all do it sometimes through conflicts, isolating, not taking care of ourselves, getting into bad relationships or staying in those relationships. That's how we get stuck in trauma. What happened when we were kids and had no agency is one thing, but if you can't shift your focus on healing how you treat yourself, how you interact with people in the world, then in a sense, you have become your trauma. Now, I know you know that you are technically not your trauma, but you know that feeling where you've just told a long story about some part of the past, and then it feels like there should be some resolution feeling or a punchline or relief at least, and all there is more distress inside. Now, TV characters do monologues about their trauma and make it look like all you had to do was admit how bad it was, and then bang, you've probably heard me complain about the Matt Damon character in Good Will Hunting. It was a good movie, but how realistic is it? He acts out, then he cries one time to his therapist, and then gets a little validation, and everything's great. He's done. Minnie Driver goes off to California with him, all because he just cognitively realized something. If only, right? It's not like that, is it? Because there's a neurological injury that needs healing. There is a lifetime of self-defeating behaviors to clear up. There's all the cultural strangeness of dysfunctional families, which is how you learn to navigate life. And now you need to relearn. And then there's that really high mountain to climb, romantic relationships, the final frontier, which makes you kind of have to go through all the phases of healing all over again before you can be at peace with yourself, before you can truly become yourself. It's a long road, but it's a happy project, making your way through these phases of healing. And it begins when you disidentify with what happened to you and focus on cultivating the best in yourself: love, creativity, confidence, professional success, vision, spiritual growth. But all these things get suppressed by, trauma. Trauma inflicted by others and by the self-sabotaging behaviors that we unwittingly bring upon ourselves. Isolating, resenting, blaming, living dishonestly or fearfully or selfishly. Everyone has a little of each of these negative tendencies, and most of us have one or two problems that really are hurting us and holding us back. And if you feel resistant to looking at this in your life, that's okay, because it's not time for you to look at this yet. But ask yourself, are you avoiding it because you feel safer in your old trauma identity? I suspect that some of you are going to tell me that all this talk of your own role in messing up your life is victim blaming. And I used to feel the same way, but I'll tell you why that turned out to be just more of my disempowered thinking. Anyone who was abused or neglected as a kid eventually was a victim, literally a victim. You were, I was, and you're not to blame for what others did to you. Okay, we agree on that. You are noble and holy for living through all that and keeping your spirit alive. And now your power to heal is in present time, in how you handle yourself and your relationships with other people. You were helpless in the past, but now you're the change agent. The changes are coming from you. And I know as well as anyone that it's confusing and clunky and not a straight path trying to change your life at this level. Trauma programs you with tiredness and bitterness and hopelessness and loneliness. That's all true. But working on yourself is still how healing gets done. It's not victim blaming. It's just the most practical way to make your life better. And that's what I mean when I say trauma is an injury, but not an identity. Trauma happened to you, but you are not defined by it. Now, one of the key signs that you're off track, that you're working on the wrong problem, is that when you try and solve a problem, nothing you do works. Sometimes when the solution doesn't solve the problem, it means you're working on the wrong problem. And I think a lot of traumatized people are working on the wrong problem or giving too much of their focus to it. And that's the problem of what happened in the past. It'll haunt you all by itself sometimes, I know. But ask yourself if your work to heal is liberating you or not. And if not, that's okay. But it could be a sign it's time to turn your focus to your own beliefs and actions. This is a potent shift. When you work on that, not only do you have power to make some actual changes, even though they're small at first, but you get this feeling in yourself like, yeah, I can do this. And this is where confidence and peace come from, when you know that whatever happens, you can trust yourself to figure it out. You'll find the part of you that can change, and you can work on that. Now, it's such a relief to be working on something that can actually change. Oh my gosh, the years I spent trying to convince my mother she should be sorry, she should be different. She died when she was a little younger than I am now, which was terrible. But I will say that when she was gone, it was 100% clear to me that any healing I was going to do going forward was not going to be from anything she said or did. I would have to do it. And so I did. You are more than your trauma, so much more. You are more than your trauma, so much more. And that is real. When you get stuck, you can't see that. All you can see is the trauma. And the memory of what happened can become more real to you than what's happening in present time. What a curse, right? Because present time is where you have agency. You can quit an addiction or leave a bad relationship or learn a new skill or heal your ability to connect with people. Now, obviously, you can't just snap your fingers and change those things, but you can take the first steps. And that's exactly how every healing journey begins. So if you're ready to shift your identity, try these two things. First, mix it up a little. It's not terrible to talk about the bad things or think about them some, but you might want to limit it to who you tell, when you tell them, so it's only to safe and appropriate listeners, and for a finite number of minutes. So if you're with a good friend and you're reminded of a traumatic memory, maybe talk about it for 5 minutes and then make yourself change the subject. You can also decide to just mention it but not go into all the details, or not mention it at all. Second, you can try this exercise. When you find yourself getting stuck in bad memories and hopeless feelings about your past, mark 2 columns on a piece of paper, right down the middle. And in the left-hand column, write about something bad about your past. Like for me, my mom was an alcoholic. And in the right-hand column, put something from about the same time in your life that actually strengthened you. So my stepdad was not an alcoholic, and he took care of us pretty well. On the bad side, our family was poor, and there was a lot of arguing about money, and a lot of times, if I didn't find a way to earn some money, I didn't have new clothes or food that wasn't free lunch. But on the other side, I learned to earn my own money at a very young age, and this prepared me to be an entrepreneur as an adult, which has been such a good thing to have. Now on the left, I was neglected as a child, and on the right, there were 2 or 3 mothers of friends who really reached out and supported me and kept an eye on me. And so when you ask me about my life, if I'm identified with the trauma, I might say, well, my mother was an alcoholic, we had terrible financial problems, and I was neglected. But when I'm identified with the positive things, my story could also just as accurately be told as, I had a stepfather who took care of us. I learned entrepreneurship from some businesses I started as a kid, and this has provided a living for me all my life. And there were some kind adults in my life who I knew I could turn to if I needed help. This sounds like a completely different life, right? But it's the same life. It's just another perspective on it. I don't have to lie about the bad things that happened or try to pretend they never happened. I can keep those as memories, as facts of my life, but they're not the whole story. They don't define me. I choose to remember the good things that I remember too. And the more I get free from the trauma identity, the more good experiences that I have today to tip the scales toward a positive sense of myself and gratitude for the full experience of my life. You can try this. You'll be amazed how much you can lift your mood in the moment by just naming the good things within yourself, the good that you've encountered in the people you've known and in your experiences. When parents treat a child like they're worthless and tell them that they're no good, it can plant that evil, self-sabotaging seed in them that even if you fight it and you rebel, it can drag you down. Sometimes it strikes you all at once. Sometimes that self-sabotage comes and gets you in 100 little decisions that you make. And it can go on for so long and get so entwined in the way you live, in what you imagine is possible in your life, that it can be hard to see that you forgot who you are. You forgot who you were meant to be. My letter today is from a woman I'll call Margie, and she writes, Hey Anna, I grew up in a home with 2 sisters, one a year older, one a year and a half younger, and the classic alcoholic father, anxious codependent mother dynamic. All right. I have a pencil. It's not the fairy pencil today. I lost it on my trip to Arizona last week. I'm getting another one, but for now it's just a pencil. All right. As a kid, Margie says, we had the money to go on vacations, but we never did. My mother always voiced her disdain for wanting to go anywhere. She didn't have to with my father, even if it meant we didn't go as a result. We went to a Catholic elementary school, and I distinctly remember never having clean pressed clothes or even my hair kept. I feel like my mother's focus was always on either my father, herself, or survival. My sisters and I remember hearing her stay up late after we had gone to bed, waiting for my drunk father to walk through the back door, and then she'd start crying about how he didn't care about anyone but himself or something along those lines. You could tell he didn't give an F, and she would do this on a weekly basis, waiting for him to come home from a night out partying to tell him how badly he was treating her, only for him to act cold and uninterested. This is the kind of thing that sets up a pattern. All right, during this time, as a young child, I do recall fantasizing a lot. I would go out in the alley on my bicycle and ride up and down the length of it, dreaming of a make-believe person who I was supposed to be and what type of life that person had. And this continued through my teen years and through the very early parts of my early 20s. And I always imagined myself as a woman who had far more capabilities. And I should mention Wait, I'm going to circle that. I circle things on the first reading just so I can see the gist of it, and then I'll come back and talk about what I've been noticing in this letter. So Margie says, I should mention that through my childhood, my father berated my sisters and me, mostly older sisters and my older sister and me, by calling us stupid, foolish, no smarter than N-words. My mother never told me I was pretty. Out of my 3 sisters, I was the one who never heard this compliment. She would say that she never gave it because she didn't want me to get a big head and turned out to be stuck on myself. Oh dear. By the time I got to be 18 years old, I got into stripping and doing private parties, bachelor parties, divorce parties, golf outings, etc. And before long, I got introduced into the world of being an escort, a call girl, if you will. And she says, I met my daughter's father through this way of work, and we'll call him Armand. Armand has pretty much always been soft, kind, and patient and forgiving with me. I didn't intend to start a family with him. At first, I figured I could parlay this into a sugar daddy thing so I could get away from the late nights and having to sleep with so many different men for money all the time. But as time went on, his kind nature grew on me and it developed into an actual romantic relationship. And it's important that I add one of the major things he kept from me during this time was how he made his money. He was into some sort of identity theft / fraud and was in the United States illegally. He also had a toddler son back in his home country who he stopped flying over here. It turns out he was never honest with the son's mother about our romantic involvement and didn't want her to find out, so he was avoiding having them here altogether. I never expressed my disdain or discomfort for any of this. Instead, I just told myself to pull back emotionally, and I even started to work as a call girl during that time again to get back at him, even though he was never made aware and I was the only one being hurt in the situation. Fast forward 2 daughters later, Armand has been locked up as of 7 years ago and deported as of 4 years ago. And my daughters and I speak to him fairly regularly by FaceTime and the like. He sends no financial support. He's not even working and hasn't been since he touched back down in his home country 3 years ago. I've told him I will wait for him to return because I feel I owe it to my kids. I also feel like no one will ever love me the way he did. He stood by me through serious ailments. I have ulcerative colitis and lost all my hair once. I've been hospitalized many times, and he knows about my past but still accepts me as lovable and beautiful. I know I'm selling myself short here, and I want to not do that anymore. More than anything, I want true love with someone who I'm not trying to manipulate in the beginning. I want the vulnerable. I feel like I never was with that. I was never vulnerable with Armand. I fear because I'm 37 years old, 2 kids with my history, it's such a faint possibility. I desperately want companionship and ultimately marriage. I know this is getting long, but something very important to add. I have a sugar daddy now. I've had this one who I'll call Mark, and since 7 years ago when my kid's father first got arrested and incarcerated. I only work part-time as a retail associate, and I've never made much money outside of using sex in exchange for it. I feel like without Mark providing me a monthly allowance or income, I would never be able to survive on my own. I enjoy working part-time as it allows so much time for my kids and me together. Plus, I get overwhelmed so easily, and I feel a full-time schedule would do just that. I was recently incorrectly diagnosed with ADHD, I believe, she says. I would love your insight to this matter, Anna. I've found myself in limerence with a crush on a guy at work, and it's making me miserable. I want the real deal. I don't want to go on living like this. I know I should have much more. I just need the steps to get there. Please, I'm ready to do the work. And she says, thank you, sincerely, Margie. Oh, gosh. All right. I think I can help. There was a lot to circle here, and Margie, I'm so sorry about the way that you were raised. I can just see it. You know, when you were describing your parents, I read your letter first, one time through, and when I read it again, preparing to record this response to your letter, I was just like, oh my gosh, look at that. What your parents said to you, like, not just that you weren't pretty, and I know that that's an important validation we get, but also that thing about your mom hanging out every week, sort of going into some
I don't know, borderline reaction or something where she wanted to wait for your drunk dad, or she just couldn't put it down. Like, that's what he did. He would go out and drink and come home drunk, and she would wait for him to get into the big fight with him about it. And that was her emotional outlet. And it's so sad. And I'm really glad, like, you're not in that kind of a situation right now. That's something, right? But also this thing that they said to you where that your dad said you were stupid, foolish, and no smarter than N-words. Unbelievable. I can't help but feel it, Margie, that somehow that got inside, and a little bit you're thinking that too about yourself. And that's why you think you can't have like an ordinary life. You know, I was a single mom for 9 years with 2 kids. And so, you know, I'll just be a role model for you. You can put your life back together. And I totally get it that with your past, it's a thing and not everybody can accept it. But that doesn't mean that this guy who's in another country not sending money, that's not the best you can do. You didn't mean to start a family. It turned into an actual romantic relationship. You didn't know what he did. And that's kind of what a person with complex PTSD, that's what we do. We stay fuzzy because instinctively we kind of know, like, if I know that, I can't really stay in good conscience. Like, that's not good. And of course that affects your daughters. I'm just here, you know, I'm not here to scold you about it, but I'm just here to validate, like, it's not good that they are so separated from their dad. It's not good that what's going on in your life, in your energy, in your self-concept is this belief that you have to have sex for money in order to survive. I don't believe that's true. And I know it's hard, like, especially if that's what you used to do. Now, there's this whole culture out there. I've heard it all my life, really, because where I live in Northern California, everybody tries to be so cool about everything, but they call it sex work. And they go, oh, it's like empowered, it's a choice, and it's not. There's almost always sexual abuse. There's almost always a history of abuse. And when there's prostitution or pornography, I'm going to come out and say it. It's harmful to all parties, and it wouldn't exist unless people had been abused and damaged by sexual abuse. And there it is. It does terrible damage to people who consume it. And when I was dating, I could tell a man who had been using a lot of porn. And I knew people who visited prostitutes as well. And their whole energy was so messed up until they really healed from what happened. You know, once it's done harm to your life, I don't think there's a 50-50 solution. Like, there needs to be like a massive change where it is renounced, that it's renounced, and you do the work to recover the sovereignty of your own being and your self-sufficiency, that you do not need a sugar daddy. And I know that throughout history, you know, lots of people have had to do this. Lots of people have had to do it to get through rough times. But what you're doing right now is you're doing it in all times. And so you are 37. This is a beautiful age to give yourself the time to go into personal development time, right? And especially for your daughters. This is not something you want to pass on to them. It would do them so much good to witness what a woman looks like when she's getting free, when she's getting up on her feet, when she's learning how to earn her paycheck, even if it means you guys are all living in a one-bedroom apartment. The dignity of being able to earn your own money and only have sex with somebody for reasons of love and commitment is going to be such a wonderful thing to demonstrate to them. And it can transform to this situation faster than you think. And I know you wrote to me, and I know you wanted to hear what I had to say, but I just really urge you to put this down, just renounce it. And you have the part-time sales job, and I know that you need that time with your daughter, but you need development. Like, retail sales is a notoriously difficult way to make money. I've been talking about money a lot. For people who were traumatized and want to change their life, like getting stuck in a minimum wage job, it's a very difficult road. There's dignity in it, but for progress in your life, and especially for raising children, it's time for you to get your education. And I really, I don't even know, I think you're in the United States. In the United States, in your state, there are programs that help single moms to make these changes, that provide some support. I know it's never enough. I know it's really difficult. I know it takes a lot of energy, but you can begin to, pave your path to start walking out of this trap that you're in, of being stuck, unable to get your own money, and to be free of men who exploit you. All right. So you said, I don't want to keep living like this. I know I should have much more, and you should. You deserve so much more. You deserve to breathe free air, to have that freedom, and to feel wonderful about yourself, for your accomplishments, for your intellect, for your grit and your courage, for being able to change your life as you have. It's not your fault that you were abused when you were a kid. It's not your fault how it affected you and how that sort of took place. But now you're the only person who can start to walk yourself out of it. I'm going to encourage you to get involved in a 12-step program. And one program where there are women who have been involved in sex work is Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. And there are women's meetings where you can have friendship and fellowship with women who get it, who are supportive and accepting of you, and you can begin to work a free program. I'm really a fan of free things. It needs to be free, right? So free help to begin to start changing your life and to identify and change the self-defeating behaviors. Because it's not just that top level of what's going on of how you get your money. There's stuff underneath that about how you feel about yourself, things that need to be rooted out. And the 12-step programs are very powerful for that. If you take them seriously, you go to a meeting. Don't ever use meetings for dating. That's called like pooping in the, what is it? I don't know. It's a metaphor for don't mess it up. Don't mess up this sacred space where you're doing your healing and you need to trust people and be safe. And the other thing that you can do for free is my daily practice. And these are the techniques that I had so much self-hatred and difficulty in feeling like I can't do it, I can't change. And the daily practice, just day by day, has helped me just take a little layer off, take a little layer off, take a little layer off, and start to become my full and real and empowered self. That is a free course. It's down below in the description section under every video I make.